Welcome everyone to the July 2026 session of the Korea Peace Study Group. Today we are really pleased that Munjo and Tasha, two of our longtime study group members, have put together a presentation on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, specifically focusing on intercountry adoptions. Now, this is a fraught issue. It's very emotional, and we know that many of you have come because of your interest in this topic. So thank you for your participation. Towards after the presentation, there will be a panel discussion with two folks, including G, who's coming to us from Jeju Island today. Pronouns are they and them, and also Mel, pronouns she and her. So we really appreciate their participation today. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Tasha, who will be kicking us off today.
Oh, hello, everyone. I didn't realize that I was going to have the honor of introducing the slideshow. I have to give credit to Munjo for creating the slides, and I just provided a little bit of assistance. Um, but what I'd like to say for, just to let everyone on the call know, but particularly the adoptees on the call, that just to give you a heads up, we're going to be covering three sessions of the work of the Korean Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And the first two sessions are focused on basically crimes against humanity that happened in Korea around the maybe before, during, and after the Korean War. And Moonjo's going to talk a lot about that. And then session three focuses on the human rights violations and abuses related to uh, the uh, the adoption the adoptions that happened after the Korean War. And you might ask yourself, well, why are we covering the other crimes against humanity that that happened during the war? Um, the thing is, all of this is interconnected. So many Korean babies and children would not have been sent overseas had the Korean War not happened, and all of the abuses and basically war crimes. So it's all interconnected. So adoptees on the call, just bear with us. We're going to be sharing some information, and some of which you might be familiar with, and maybe some of it will be new. But we feel like it's really important information to share. And I want to thank everyone for joining our presentations, and especially the Korean adoptees on the call. Thank you so much. Munjo, take it away.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Tasha. Hello, everyone. Yeah, my name is Munjo. I grew up in South Korea, and I even served or detained in the military. Um, then they came to this country until you know in my 50s. I didn't know all these big events in the modern Korean history. They didn't teach in schools. They didn't talk about all this, even though hundreds and even millions of people got affected, killed, suffering, up to now. They don't teach these atrocities and these tragedies just hidden away. Um, so as Tasha said, these all and tragedies are interconnected, and starting from, and then good thing about this truth and reconciliation, um, it discovered a lot of truth, hidden truth, by talking to people. and it compiled and published the reports. So this is what we are will present today. Okay. Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Korea is short for TRCK, or TRC, just the TRC, was established to investigate a century of historical trauma ranging from Japanese colonial rule to military dictatorships, and with overseas adoption was added later. And then it was explicitly modeled after South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So TCR reports are official because they are produced by a government agency. This is a government body. Reports are about various state violence and human suffering cases. Koreans who are well educated in South Korean schools, like myself, would have an immediate reflex. Oh, violence by North Korea, right? No, these reports quietly flip the prevalent view 180 degrees, turning it right side up. The state violence and human suffering history has been suppressed with more violence and distorted or ignored. So the TRC reports have a significant meaning. They can be used by civilians to debunk the prevalent ideological myth without worrying about the notorious national security law in Korea. Also, they can be used to defend their speeches against the U.S. collaborators' attacks in Korea, including the mainstream media. So it was a good step. However, incomplete they might be, because with the important truth suppressed and hidden away, people can't make informed decisions. And as a consequence, democracy is undermined. TRC is not something new for KPNGN. Reverend Shin presented a similar topic last month. And we used to use the many findings from the TRC reports for our previous presentations on the Korean War. It's like a couple of years ago.
Munjo, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but are you supposed to be, is this the first, are you still on the first slide?
Yeah. We'll move on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the commission was born from South Korea's decades-long democratization movement, which started from like 1990s, and aiming to address state-sanctioned violence. And the truth had been hidden and suppressed by anti-communist ideology and military rule backed by the US. And thanks to the democratization, early 2000, this commission was established. So this is the timeline. The first term started from 2005 and 2010, and second one started 2020, and lasted for 5 years. And the third term, which is the current term, started earlier this year. This is gap here, right? About 10 years of gap. It's because during these 10 years, the conservative administration took over, and then they effectively defunded this commission, so they couldn't work. So the first term focused on the Korean War era abuses and massacres and colonial era atrocities. And the second term is violence is from the military dictatorship mainly. And the third term focuses on the overseas adoption, so which we'll talk more about later. So this the TLC Korea is not an isolated event or effort, but it's part of the global, I would say, progressive movement. So it benchmarked South Korea's TLC. The primary goal is to heal the fractured nation without tearing it apart. So the TLC Korea, followed basically the same pattern. Okay, this section, because I'll go over rather quickly. So was established in 2005 under the new law, and served as an independent operational body with investigations heavily active from 2006 to 2008, like excavating the mass burial sites, and investigated anti-Japanese movements, Korean War massacres, and authoritarian era human rights abuses. Korean War civilian massacres we covered quite a lot during our previous presentations on the Korean War. It's a million, up to million, even more than a million civilians were massacred by the state, the Korean government, and military forces, and then police and the U.S. soldiers. So the biggest one is a Border League massacre. So this agency uncovered these truths. And the South Korea was governed by the Lee Seung-man administration for more than 10 years, like 13 years, 12 years. And after that, two military dictatorship took over the country, and they did a lot of state-sponsored violence. So it uncovered the state abuses as well. And also it went back prior to 1945 during the Japanese the imperial era. So the independence movements, it's all inside Korea, around Korea, or even in America, in Europe. So it it did a lot of findings in this area too. Yeah, this is the excavation, the results. This is all human bones excavated. I don't know, you can see these skulls. There's so many. So with this result, the government apologized and did some legal redress actions, and also published the reports. We used the reports to create this presentation. And second term it started much later, and it's an extension of the first term, but it introduced the March 15 democracy movement, which happened in 1960, right before the well-known the April 19th uprising, students' uprising. Before that event, this March 15 democracy movement happened. And then at least one person was killed and then thrown to the sea, which was discovered. And this event triggered the April event. So it shows the scale is more than 20,000 cases were submitted. And it shows each category, like mass civilian killings, like almost 10,000. But this is no way is the whole picture. This is the tip of the iceberg. We got some numbers like this. And yeah, this is some examples discovered by the second term. Hwasun, the massacre, so where 47 victims were killed, and Goryeo, the massacre, like 34 victims identified. And this is a different. It's just outright. It's not outright killings, but the serious human violations in this brother's home is basically is on the surface. It solves. It helps the orphans and some unfortunate people, but in reality they use them for their interest. So it was being used in Korea. So 337 victims were identified. Like there's a lot more, but filings maybe 337 cases. And Sungam Academy is similar. It's a serious human violation case. And there's more because Samcheong camp right after the John Duan took over the government, and they send a lot of people to this camp. It's like a military kind of military sort of prison. Then 40,000 forcibly detained, and there are other human right violation cases here. So the commission, commission published the recommendations, and also the enacted legislation for comprehensive reparation and compensation. And so they proposed universal compensation regardless of perpetrator, and relief for statute barred claims, and standards based on Jeju 430 Act, and also includes non-monetary remedies like counseling and medical care and legal support. Okay, now we arrived at the inter-country adoption. So we started in the middle of the second term, and since then, like hundreds of petitions have been filed by the overseas or inter-country adoptees. So TRC investigated 367 petitions in 2020, and the petitioners were adopted between 1964 and 1999 into 11 different countries. The biggest country of all is, of course, the U.S. Majority of the adoptees were adopted to the U.S. So, and this is estimation of overseas, inter-country adoptees is about 140,000, but other sources say is 170 or even 200,000. So it's somewhere 170,000 and 200,000. Yeah. Okay. So here are some historical backgrounds. It started right after the Korean War. The Korean War produced a lot of orphans, and also mixed children, because there are a lot of foreign soldiers, and there are a lot of camptown women, and these mixed children are not accepted by the Korean society. Even they couldn't be registered in the Hojo, the official document, and then they couldn't go to the school. So a lot of mothers willing to adopt their children out. And it started that way, but it changes its character um, to proxy adoption. Uh, so up to this point, the adoption, the intercountry adoption, was happened by the court, as far as I understand, court and the adoptive parents will see the baby and then will decide to adopt. With the proxy adoption, adoptive parents don't get to see the baby, and it's an agency in between. So it evolved like this. And what happened? The number of adoptees was growing. Okay, we'll see the graph. Okay, started with the war opens, but numbers growing, even though the war ended and then decades passed, like 10 years and 20 years passed, but still the overseas adoptions were growing because um, the because of the war, intercountry adoption pipeline was established, and the demand was growing. So somehow South Korea have to come up with the supply. And it peaked right before uh, the Seoul Olympic. There was 1987. It topped almost around like 10,000 a year that year. So here's some numbers we've seen already. This 140,000 overseas adoptees, and out of that number, majority of the adoptees were adopted to the United States, and there was 4 agencies, including Holt, KSS, KWS, and ECWS. And interestingly, more than 60% of petitioners are adopted to Denmark, and much less number of adoptees petitioned from the United States. And this is the fee in 1980s, like $1,450, and plus mandatory donations. And then 1/3 of the petitioners still have no formal termination of Korean nationality. And many of them don't have U.S. nationality citizenship. So this is the graph. Right after the war, it wasn't much, but from this point, it's started growing even long after the war. And there's some dip, and it topped at around like 85 or 87 before the Seoul Olympic. The report said the military dictator government wanted to clear out the streets. So they wanted give away these inconvenient children. So this is what I was educated. Okay, there was a war, terrible war. There are that it produced many orphan wars, and the U.S. rescued them by adopting them into the U.S. homes. Um, there was there's benevolence. There was benevolence, and the report says it's, it's about one to 10 ratio. Um, the orphans out of orphanages adopted out to other countries, and the remaining children view them as lucky ones. And many inter-country adoptees may have better lives in their countries. Uh, Here's a question: is this a benevolent U.S. narrative complete? And why was South Korea so eager to send its own children abroad for adoption instead of taking care of them by themselves? And as the demand grew, the sources also diversified from child protection facilities like orphanage, and also from adult institutions. Uh, the children born to women confined in vagrant shelters and psychiatric facilities and brothers' homes were taken without valid consent or form of forced adoption or maybe outright kidnapping. From medical institutions, agents paid delivery assistance fees to uh, obstetric and gynecology and maternity clinics to obtain newborns, including those of married couples. And the missing or abducted children were routinely misclassified as foundlings and sent abroad. It's good. Yeah. So in another word, the children become a commodity. So, um, and monthly quotas agreed between Korean and foreign agencies. They work together. And like a 10 to 16 children flown together at a time. And bulk transports with inadequate care, and children matched to adoptive parents' preferences. The adoptive parents would choose uh, their babies out of catalog, possibly, and there's uh, financial incentives. So, another word is profit driven. The mandatory donations on top of fees, and foreign agencies funded Korean facilities to secure children, and discounted fees for children with disabilities and older children. Agencies amassed billions of Korean won in real estate. They amassed wealth by selling children. So these human rights violations are identified. It's outright kidnapping and human trafficking in many cases, and loss of identity. Because they, in many cases, most documents, other documents are fabricated. For instance, the one child for some reason dies, and then in the waiting list, the another child takes the place without changing the name. Just yeah, and abuse and statelessness. There's you sent to the adoptive country and the adoptive family. In many cases, the adoptive parents for didn't follow up to give citizenship to their adopted children, and loss of origin tracing because of falsified documents. In many cases, they found the DNA didn't match, and the violations to constitutional rights to dignity and happiness, and of the UN Convention on the Rights of Child, rights to name, nationality, parental care, and family. So the report includes this particular case. The adoptee Shin was brought to America as a child to build a life, but a paperwork failure and series of abandonments left him legally unprotected. So ultimately, he was deported back to Korea, where he, he's basically the country is new, is a foreign country to him. And the similar case, the Adam Krebser was reported like 10 years ago by various news platforms. He was deported from the U.S. due to the lack of citizenship, leaving his wife and two young daughters behind the U.S. And the Krebs is still living in Korea, now waiting for the new law to be enacted. So like Shin and Krebs, there are many adoptees who have been deported. And I got to know about this wonderful audiobook about Korean adoptees is given away. I will if you search on Audible or Amazon, you will find this wonderful book. And I will drop some links about Korean adoptee stories and these news articles on the chat. This is the Krebs's family. There's two beautiful daughters and beautiful wife. So the Adam is in Korea now. So commission concluded. Korea neglected its constitutional treaty-based duty to protect adoptees and outsourcing child welfare to private agencies to avoid public spending. Despite the knowledge of widespread illegality, the legislative, executive, and judicial branches failed to amend the laws, enforce overnight, or protect children abroad for decades. Adoption agencies operated as a profit-driven industry, with the government turning a blind eye, leading to Korea's international reputation as a child exporting country. The Commission formally recognized the 56 petitioners as the victims of serious human rights violations. They recommended to the Korean state issue a formal apology to adoptees and ratify the Hague Convention Intercountry Adoption, which was signed in 2013, investigate illegal adoptions, identity substitutions, and statelessness, correct falsified family registers, improve record collection and preservation, and fund the DNA testing and reunion and family restoration support. And also recommended financial incentives, apologize to adoptees whose rights were violated, take active measures to redress harms, transfer all adoptee records in full to the National Adoption Archives. So we reviewed these human violations and all the tragedies very quickly. The modern Korean history tells us if the US had left Korea alone, this is not from the TRC reports, by the way, from our study group's findings. Then there wouldn't be any division of Korea because the US divided Korea. No Korean War. There's no division and no Korean War. And no Korean War and no millions of deaths. The death was estimated between 4 to 5 millions. 70% of the death was civilian. And no ongoing threats of wars between two Koreas. It's still not ended. It's still ongoing threat. And no civilian death before the war. Even before the war, at least 100,000 civilians were killed. During the struggles between Korean people and the US. No war orphans and no suffering of overseas adoptees. Overseas adoptees started out, as we saw, started out with the war orphans and mixed race children. And no extreme poverty after the war. The Korea was ruined, literally ruined, because the US dropped more bombs than the older bombs it dropped during the Pacific War. No US occupation and no suffering of Camptown women, and no US collaborator backbone. Currently, up to now, until now, the backbone, the power backbone of the South Korea is consists of US collaborators, descendants of the Japanese collaborators, and that distorted the society significantly. And no military dictatorships, and no human rights violations, and no deaths under them. And fully independent Korea. Currently, the South Korea is military occupied by the US. And much less social pathological problems like 갑질, if you have heard of it, 갑질, and then high suicide rate and lowest birth rate because of all this stress. In the recent movie, the Teacher Lesson Netflix series, it shows these pathological problems, a lot of pathological problems in schools and around the schools. So yeah, I'm done, Tasha.
Okay, thank you very much, Munjo, for your very detailed and thoughtful presentation. I know you spent a lot of time researching that, so thank you so much for that. And that was a lot of information to take in and just a lot of information about human suffering. And I want to encourage people to feel free to take a couple breaths, if you want to let out a sigh, or to stand up and shake or stretch or do whatever. If you need to do anything to take care of yourself, please do it right now, because it was a wonderful presentation and it was really a lot to take in one session. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to start just kind of an open discussion, but I'd like to review a couple of community agreements just to kind of, in the interest of creating a safe space for everyone, but particularly our adoptees. Um, uh, Non-adoptees like me, I'm a multiracial Korean, but I'm not an adoptee. So those of us who are not adoptees, we're invited to acknowledge that we are not fully able to understand the unique and challenging experiences of Korean adoptees. We hope to minimize harm that could happen during this conversation due to unskillful questions, comments, and other types of behavior. So please, let's all keep that in mind. And then we're giving our adoptees special permission to take up space. Any adoptees present, because we know of a couple of them, they've been sort of introduced, but there might be other people on the call who are adopted. You are all invited to share your stories, thoughts, and feelings before others have a chance to comment or ask questions kind of later on. If there's time, we'll open it up for people who want to ask questions. We would welcome hearing from you if you feel comfortable sharing. Of course, if you just want to listen, that's fine too. And then lastly, confidentiality, take home learnings, but don't identify anyone other than yourself now or later, just in case, so that people can feel safe disclosing things about themselves. So thank you so much for your attention to that. And yeah, I just want to give special thanks to Mel and G. So there are two featured kind of guests, and they've agreed to just share some thoughts. You know, if they feel like it, they're invited to share their stories if they want, or their thoughts and reflections if they feel like they can answer questions in the chat, or basically whatever you want to share with us. And then after Mel and G have a chance to speak, we're going to open it up to other adoptees if they're on the call, and then everyone else. So Mel, because I've known Mel longer, I just had the pleasure of meeting G very recently on Zoom. Mel, would you like to share some thoughts first?
Yeah.
Maybe
Hi.
I should
My name's oh, sorry. Go
stop
ahead.
sharing, right?
Um, it, I think that's okay. Yeah,
That's okay.
either
All
way
right.
is fine.
Okay.
I don't care. I'm not picky. Okay. Hi. My name is Mel. My name in Korean is Taehoon, and I was adopted through Holt International, now known as Holt, formerly known as Holt Children's Services, also now a defunct organization. In 1993, I was brought over to the United States. I was born in Busan, and I was adopted by a white military family, and I spent most of my life in Nebraska and most of the Midwest and in parts of the South. I kind of moved around and went to a lot of places, and that's kind of my base story. I now reside in the PNW. I don't really have a lot to say. I mostly want to answer questions and sort of have a more free flow dialogue. Um, that's all. That's all I really got. I feel like I could talk. I think forever about this kind of thing in my situation. I do want to plug two things. There's two things I want to plug. Um, there's like so much to talk about in terms of like the connection to Korean adoption and the war and pretty much the sort of whole thing that's happened in the country. And I still say this to say, but I always say that like the Korean War lives with me and will never leave until the war is over. Because Holt was the original progenitor of this whole thing. Bertha and Harry Holt are the reason why I'm here. They're the reason why everything is the way it is. And so I have the unfortunate reality of being brought through the original organization and all of the, I guess, baggage and stuff that has come forth. So I always try to do this. These are, I know people plug stuff. This is called Haunting of the Korean Diaspora by Grace M. Cho, and this is probably like a really good primer book if you really want to read some awful stuff, but I think it really cuts extra deep, and there's a lot of like passages in that book that even though like I wasn't like there in the 50s, um I don't know my parents. I don't know what the decision on the ground was or what people had to do, but it's truly like I understand where the trauma comes from. And my second one that I always try to tell people to read, this is called The First Ameri-Asians. Ameri-Asian was a term used to describe mixed race Koreans, specifically those who were biracial Koreans, specifically Black Koreans who came over to the United States. Um, Dr. Galen, I think you should read this. Um, this would give you like a lot of impact and hopefully a lot of hope, um, and a lot of history of why this stuff kind of happened. It's by a descendant of a Korean adoptee all called Dokad. Their name is Yuri W. Dulin. And I think my favorite part about both of these books is that when you read the like sort of like intro memoriam of like who the book is for, they're always for their mother. Um, I think that's like really sweet because I think that's where a lot of this stuff is. There's a lot of talk about like maternity and being a mom and the loss of that kind of stuff. So those are only the two things I have to plug. I think everyone should read them if you want like a really like hard intro. I have a lot of stuff that I've learned from those books and corroborated with other people that I've talked to. So if you want like a really good, like really heavy detailed history and you want to cry a little, I suggest read them. And that's all I really have. And then we'll pass it on to G.
Thank you for this presentation. Thank you for inviting me. My name is G, and yeah, I'm currently in Jeju-do, Korea. So I moved here about a year and a half ago and moved to Jeju a year ago. I was born in Incheon and trafficked to the United States in 92. And raised in Michigan, west side of Michigan, and then moved to Chicago and then New York. Um, and then had my second trip to Korea back in 2023. That was the first time as an adult. The first time had been in 2008. So I was quite young. And so then, yeah, after that trip, um, back a few years ago, I felt a really strong connection to the land. I felt really compelled to try and figure out a way to come back here and live here. And then when I came back from the trip, my life was kind of destabilized and crumbling. So it felt like a good time to try and make the move to Korea. And so that's what I did. Um, and yeah, um, I also have a lot of things that I could talk about. I think there were some questions in the chat that I could maybe speak a little bit to, maybe not so much like the broader policies, but from my own experiences of just like, I think one of the questions was about like why there was such a trend to specifically adopt from Korea. And personally, from my experience, like when I had asked my mom this, um, because like Korea after the war had systematized and capitalized on the adoption industry for so many years in comparison to other countries, it became um, they created these institutions and partnerships with all of these private organizations. So specifically in Grand Rapids area, like in the area that I was, the adoption agencies were kind of like advertising more so for these transnational adoptions from Korea. And so my mom had heard about it through a woman at the nail salon. So a lot of people, through word of mouth, as they started to see more visibilized Korean children in these predominantly white neighborhoods, were questioning. And so because my mom was looking to have more kids, she found out from a woman at the nail salon. So at the very like micro level, like that's how it happened. It's like through word of mouth, through visibilization, because of these institutions and private organizations that had been established for so long. So that's just like a little bit, I think, of of my personal experience tied to that question. But yeah, very open to answering more questions, so please don't feel shy.
Thank you so much, G and Mel, for sharing your stories. And we really appreciate hearing adoptee voices right now. And I'd like to open it up to if there are any other adoptees that would like to share some thoughts or reflections. You can just jump in right now, um, or maybe a little later if you're not quite ready. But I wanted to put that out there. Um, and oh, we're seeing Munjo's screen now. Um, so yeah, so if there are any other adoptees, otherwise I think we'll open it up to maybe questions or any reflections um from other people on the call. Let's take a moment just to see if anybody wants to jump in. And while we're doing, oh, it looks like, okay, looks like we have a question. While we're doing that, while we're just taking a moment, I just wanted to thank G and Mel again for just being so generous and sharing your stories and your presence today. I really, really appreciate it.
I earnestly love talking about this stuff. I've learned in like my years of growing up that the only reason why anyone knows that we exist is because we talk about it. And so I know this is like such a hard ask, but please just ask things no matter how stupid or silly or clunky or ridiculous they are, because I think what it generates is like contradiction. And I think the thing, because I was reading a lot of side questions in chat and like people are trying to like, I think one of the things that always sticks out to me is that there is no one reason. I think there's like no true answer. Like, why did Korea do this? Why did the government do this? Why did, who stopped it? I have read like maybe hundreds of accounts from like 1950 all the way to now, like parents that have had their kids taken away in 2023 and have put their child on the NCRC board. And the same sort of thing always sort of rings is that no one really knows why. Like, there's just too many factors. Um, so I think like there's never going to be hard answers. There's only going to be perspective and um, what people like live. And I'm not trying to say that necessarily the lived experience are the facts, but I don't have a lot of facts, right? Like I know adoptees who like know who've met their parents, who have flown back. I know people who have literally falsified paperwork and have no idea where they're from. I have people who I know who don't even like weren't even interested in being Korean or being adopted and didn't care. So I think as long as everyone's okay with not getting hard answers, please don't be shy. Just ask stuff, even if it is a little bit clunky at times.
I think we had someone raise their hand a little while ago. I can't remember who it was, but if you just want to jump in and ask Mel, oh,
Yeah,
Mike, yeah, Mike, if you'd
yeah,
like to
that
jump
was
in, since Mel has generously offered to try to answer questions.
okay. So my question deals with certain places like the Brothers Home, and based on the documentary I saw, they were not as legitimate as some of the other agencies. And I mean, a lot of this confuses me because apparently the South was more impoverished than the North till at least 1975. So I can see how in a lot of countries, and I mean, this is still going on today, children from Cambodia, Laos, Burma, or Myanmar are being bought and sold. I mean, so it's not like it's something in the past. I mean, it's very contemporary. I mean, we can talk about years that children were bought and sold from China. We can talk about Romania. We can talk about other places. But I mean, it hasn't stopped. It's just shifted countries. But the question I'm trying to get at, so the Brothers Home apparently was to some degree hijacking I don't know how to put it, but maybe hijacking the process. So there were children that were more legitimately adopted out. And then there was the black market, so to speak, of just trying to meet the demand in these other countries. So I know I'm missing a lot because I don't really understand this, but is there any way you can talk about the difference between what may have been somewhat legitimate and what was definitely black market activity?
So here's the hard truth about international adoption. It's all black market. So let me verify. So when Harry Holt and Bertha like got inspired by war orphans in World War II and wanted to do something like, for the good of mankind or whatever, a lot of these adoption agencies actually started out as Christian evangelical agencies. And so, if you know the history of evangelism in Asia, when the evangelists came over in the 1800s and started going all throughout places like Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam and China and whatnot, a lot of the anchor organizations that funded a lot of money and a lot of foreign money during the tumultuous times during like the Chinese Civil War and like the 1900s and Korea's early development were funded through churches. And so, because this religious anchor existed so prominently in Asia, it was really easy for anyone who was a Christian to say, hey, like, I'm going to go over, I'm going to like save children. And so they would basically use the churches that they were as essentially seed money. And they would head over and they would basically say, okay, we're going to set up a church, we're going to start feeding people, we're going to do missionary work. And war orphans was a very popular thing. It was being done in Europe. Someone in chat talked about how the Irish actually exported thousands of kids to Boston. So this is not just a particular thing that happens with non-white children. This is sort of the idea that a lot of the selling of children is essentially used by religious fervor to do this. I mean, this was done even in Tibet with slavery. Essentially, what happens is a lot of these major religious organizations, they're the ones that have the money, the capital, and the connections to get people in. We saw this as early as like when the North Korean famine happened in 1996, and religious organizations were basically infiltrating parts of the DPRK and trying to smuggle North Korean children out. It's not one story, but the church does play like a huge part of it. And Brothers Home was sort of like a cult house. So Brothers Home essentially was in order to bring people into Brothers Home, they used wayward mothers. So basically, they would convince these mothers, like, hey, you need God, you need religion. Come to Royal Busan, and we'll set you up with like a home and a job and money. And these mothers would get attracted to this place. The churches would convince them to go. And the Brothers Home scandal is actually what fueled a lot of the anti-religious uh, fervor in South Korea, because they found out that these mothers were essentially being gaslit by these church organizations. And they disguised their legitimacy by saying, like, we're from the church. Like, you trust the church, right? Now, Korea has this whole, thing with cults and whatnot, but we're different, right? Different strain, different group of people. And so these wayward mothers got coerced, and how they used legalities, because the Korean church system at the time in the 80s, as long as you had a church, you could basically make like their version of like an LLC, is like, I think my understanding of it. I don't know much about Korean legal law. I'm only regurgitating things that I've read. So essentially what happened is these brothers homes were shell companies, and so when women were brought in, they essentially put them in like slave conditions, and they basically made them have children, and they would sell the children. Now, there were times when adoption in South Korea was declining, and when those declines happened, Brothers Home would be the first people to be like, hey, we have children, and they wouldn't disclose where they got the children, because obviously the Brothers Home scandal is what revealed all the things that were happening. And so it's not that there's one direction, it's that it's always sort of been like a black and gray market. And so I don't exactly know the mechanics of it. Like, I just don't know. Like, documents have been destroyed, like the cities have been rebuilt due to industrialization. Like, there's so many missing details. I can only infer and speculate from things that I've read over the years. But the Brothers Home thing in particular, and how a lot of this stuff was anchored, was just religious organizations shaking hands with governments essentially. And I mean, I could probably talk about it in like till forever. There's no real reason, but Brothers Home was notoriously bad because the government was actively involved in covering it up. And because the government was so involved in it, and because there's a difference between Holt Korea and Holt International. So up until 1975, Holt Korea and Holt International were the same organization. And what happened is, the reason why they broke up, the reason why they kind of separated, is because a lot of the foster mothers and social workers who were working for Holt International or Holt Korea at the time were actively upset, and they were like pressuring the government internally, saying, hey, like, I actually want to do inter-Korean adoptions. Like, I don't want to send children overseas. And a lot of this complaining was essentially subdued by government by saying, hey, these people are whining too much, they're causing too much riffraff, they're making too much noise, so we have to start pushing this stuff underground. And so every time the adoption stuff would get like sort of, when the controversy would reach the state would essentially just say, oh yeah, no, we took care of it. And that's sort of what happened with me, because a lot of the documents for people who were adopted in the 90s are really hard to find. That's why Korea likes to say, like, oh yeah, we stopped doing adoptions in 88, like we stopped doing that. And then you see that massive dip on the chart, but is that really a dip? That's when the numbers start to get really gray. So I don't know all the details from what happened from like 85 to 97. I just know that that's when stuff got really, really gray and really, really opaque. And I think as we find documents, and as the NCRC and more stuff gets investigated and archived and people come out and tell their stories, maybe we'll find more, but I don't really know exactly. I just know that there were just a lot of organizations with lots of different hands in the pot. And there isn't really one direct link or sort of like through line. And, I mean, also time. I don't know if people still remember. I mean, a lot of people from that era are, getting older, memories are going away, people are passing away, it's hard to tell. I wish I could offer more, but yeah,
Thank you so
it's a
much,
big spider
Mel.
web, I guess.
Yeah, I knew you would have a lot to share with us. And it looks like we have a question from Miros. Um, Miros, would you like
Yeah,
to share your question? And we can see if Mel or
yeah,
anyone else would like to address it.
yeah. Thank you, Tasha. Thank you, Mel and G, for your amazing testimony, and to Muno and Tasha for organizing this. This is really, I'm so eager to learn so much about this, and I want to be as respectful as possible. I just want to share a quick experience that I had that might relate back to what Mel was just mentioning at the end there. In the late 90s, and I'm sorry, my video is not working, but anyway, the late 90s, I was teaching English in South Korea, and I knew a lot of English teachers, and we were told that if we took babies from Korea to the United States, that we would get our flights paid for. And so a lot of young people were actually flying back to the United States on this free bill, just not even knowing the babies that they were carrying out. This is in the late 90s, and I don't see, it was so prevalent, but I don't see that reflected in the numbers. Um, I just wanted to put that out there. So I think that there is something wrong with the way that we're tracking how the frequency and the chart, because in my experience, it just seemed to be so prevalent in the late 90s. So that was just something that I was curious about. I have so many questions, but one of the questions that I have is about this issue of being separated from your people and your culture to make this very, very long distance journey. How does that affect you differently in a kind of just a humanitarian way than being adopted, say, from, to a community that is closer to our Korean proximity? Do you know what I mean? Like I'm trying to get my head around that, because I know that it has to be so difficult. Just even just being a part of the diaspora, as a Korean American, it's difficult. But to be so far removed from your family. I don't know if you know, there's a scholar, Paisley Rekdal, who wrote about the vestiges of the Vietnam War, and she talks about how the Vietnamese families and some of the orphan children were intentionally placed in parts of the United States where there were predominantly white homogenous communities, and that the US government was very explicit about making sure that they wouldn't be put into communities where there was a strong Asian presence. And I think that that might have been something to do with, and this is what Rechtel argues, that it has something to do with national security issues. They believe that if babies that came from these countries were to be raised amongst their country folk, that they might rise up in rebellion against the United States. And so
So
that was a security issue. But I was wondering what you've anybody thought about that.
I have so much to say. This is gonna be, this is why I love questions like this. Yeah, so the Dulles brothers in 1965 put out a cable where the Dulles brothers basically said this, and this is true. And like, I don't know if you've read like the Devil's Chessboard. It's where basically you find out that the Dulles brothers are like the most like evil people on earth or whatever. Is fine. So what's crazy about this is that in 1965 there was a cable sent to, I don't know what president administration actually ended up reading the cable, but the Dulles brothers basically said the original reason for putting non-white citizens in sort of these segregated places, especially in the Midwest and the Jim Crow South, because a lot of these people actually went to the Jim Crow South at this time. The two books that I listed talk a lot about that, so that's why I tell people to read them, because it's like really good. They can say other things that I can't. So there's sort of two things that happened. You have one where they wanted to send all these people here because they were trying to like best the Soviet Union. So one of the anti-communist sort of responses and during the propaganda war was that North Korea and progressive organizations within South Korea were constantly, sort of posturing at the United States saying, how could you send our children overseas? Like, how could you, like, there's the ego of like the Western nation who would deliberately basically send their children to the most like racist area of the United States. Like even the North Koreans and even other people in the Soviet bloc like knew what they were doing was like funky. It was bad. And in order to fight the propaganda, the US were saying, hey, like if we send all of these post-war children, we can Americanize them. We can make them red, white, and blue, and we can show to the world that basically these children, like, they want this. This is what they wanted the whole time. They wanted to be homogenized. They wanted to be American. And that the fear, it was a national security fear, because the fear of if we send these people to, like, LA or a ghettoized neighborhood, they will intermix with the other undesirable folks and they'll revolt everywhere. And this was like during the 60s and the 70s and stuff like that. So it was a pretty valid fear for the US state at the time. But, unfortunately as like time went on, it started to, lose the whole thing. And but I know that was a thing that they did talk about. It was a pretty like open secret. It's sort of why the civil rights acts were passed to sort of stabilize like rights and equality and like voting for lots of ethnic minorities. They were sort of granting minorities rights as they were bringing in these children. There's like the War Brides Act. All of this stuff kind of compounds on itself. And so that's why a lot of it exists, is because it's the same thing with like birthright citizenship, right? Like a lot of these things a lot of the immigration law that are positive were actually put on the books in the US framework because we were basically bringing in people from Asia, and that spread to other racialized minorities as well, and the minority and the model minority myth. Like all this stuff was all kind of done in tandem, and like again, it was all happening all at the same time. But yeah, it's a crazy story. Um, you said something about how the 90s were like really opaque with kids. There's an anecdote in one of these books where essentially when Harry Holt was walking through a village, the mothers would like hide the kids from him because they recognized his face. And so he would go to villages where no one knew his face because he literally like bragged to a guy. He was like, you can just like go out and you can just like take a kid. So Harry Holt and his brother went with him, and his brother's like, because he tried to go to villages. So Harry Holt basically went to his brother, went to villages by himself with a couple of guys, and the Koreans would come out and they would basically like throw shoes at them. They would like try to like the men would come out and punch them and they'd fight them. And he got so upset at getting beat up all the time that he brought in his brother, and his brother was like a mob guy from like Chicago or some shit. And so his brother basically, he was a big dude, and he would basically he convinced Harry Holt to like go to like a village where no one knew his name and no one knew him. And he basically walked up and he picked up a child and then he put it in the car and he just drove away. And you saying that a person just like went somewhere in Korea and just like put a child on a plane for a free plane ticket is the funniest shit to me, because that's just like how a lot of this shit is. Like it's not that. I know there's like obviously like the industry, and like there's obviously a lot of like institutionalized stuff, but a lot of like this is why I say that it's human trafficking, because there are so many people who just never had their story told, who never had their story documented, kids that were just literally just in the street somewhere and just picked up by some guy and never seen from again. And the fact that it like happened back then and still happens now is crazy. So I don't know. That little anecdote's really funny because I don't know. I believe it. I've read so much of these. I can't not believe that it's not real, because like how could it not be? It's crazy.
Mel, what you just said reminded me of something that happened in the US about the time of the Civil War. So in New York and Boston along the East Coast, what would happen was the Protestant children's aid societies were concerned that children would grow up Catholic. So apparently they would take the Catholic little children, 2 or 3 years old, and put them on these orphan trains here to the Midwest. And a lot of Catholic children just disappeared, and they'd report them to the police. And My child's gone, my little 2 or 3 year old or whatever age. And so America ended up with a lot of Catholics in the Midwest being raised by Protestants for apparently their salvation or whatever their justification was.
I like to say that the Midwest is like the dumping ground of human beings because it was sort of like a place where like you would essentially go, and like that lines up with like US history because there used to be like an old saying that like everything west of St. Louis was the Wild West, and that even like persisted until like the 1910s and even the 1930s. Like most people did not live in the Midwest. Like you either lived on the West Coast or you lived on the East Coast or you lived in like Texas, um, because of the Texas Republic and all of that jazz. But most people did not live in like Nebraska, Iowa, Michigan, the Dakotas, or Oklahoma, for example. And it didn't help that all those places were considered like Indian territory. And so it was truly like I always like to call like the middle of the country like the churn because it truly is just like the dumping ground of like every person you've ever met from every circumstance, and it's more segregated than probably any other area of the country. And so everyone's like separated by class and race, and it's sort of when you go there, you're sort of like assigned a seat basically. And so I'm not surprised that Protestants are raising Catholics or Catholics are raising Protestants because that's just like what people do there. I mean, you just end up somewhere, and that's the circumstances. It's crazy. Yeah.
Thank you, Mel. Yeah. Um, so yeah, thank you so much for just sharing so much with us. So we usually wrap up like at 6:15 or 6:30. But if people want to stay on and just kind of informally chat a while longer, I know I'm willing to to stay on a bit more. If there are more questions or Mel's really on a roll. You're doing great. I knew you would come through for us. And gee, if there's
This
anything
is the
else
only thing
that
I've
you would
spent
like
so
to
much of my life
share,
talking about.
don't be shy. Or you can be shy if you want, but feel free to to share more comments if you want. Um, yeah, so oh, it looks like Jenny's got something, either a question or something to say.
Question. I was wondering, Mel, if you could share a little bit more about, you made a comment about Christians smuggling or trying to smuggle Korean kids out of the DPRK. And I'm just curious about that because this is the first time I've heard this.
There's a lot of Christian advocacy groups. Like I have to find the documentaries, but they didn't really mention the adoption stuff, but they did mention that a lot of the groups that interact with the DPRK from a domestic sort of Korean American NGO perspective, a lot of them are Christians. So a lot of there's I can't remember the pastor's name. I think it's like Sung. He's like Sungri or something, but he does evangelism where he basically has a fund where you can give to North Korean defectors. And so he helps them defect to South Korea, but his pipeline is that he's saving Korean Christians. And he uses that line because when DPRK was actually formed, the Protestants had a really large presence in the DPRK in the 1800s. Actually, the Protestant churches actually built a lot of the infrastructure around Pyongyang. And what's interesting is that I think Kim Il Sung's father, um, or his brother, someone in his family was actually like a Presbyterian pastor. And
No,
so
this is
that's why there's
parents, both
some.
his mom and his dad.
Yeah, yeah, his parents. It's parents. Yeah, I couldn't remember if his parents or his brother. Yeah, his parents were Presbyterian pastors. There's always sort of been like a church link even to the DPRK. And there are some Christians in the DPRK who end up defecting. And so a lot of those organizations that do NGO work for defectors, a lot of them are Christian mission driven. And so when there is a religious element to these kinds of things, there is always some form of human trafficking or smuggling, almost always. I don't know how much of it is true. There's been anecdotal evidence. It's still pretty hard to find like hard sources, every time I try to look up sources, it hasn't been properly archived, so it's 404, but I still always try and look around. So if I find
So
anything, I can send something to
there,
Tasha to send to
there
you.
was a comment that Michael just did about Reverend Moon. Apparently, he was invested in the North Korean auto industry in the 50s and 60s, and him and Kim Il-sung, there's pictures of them embracing each other as best friends. Not best friends, but I mean former friends or something like that. So yeah,
Yeah, I think
Reverend, the
he's originally
Invocation
from
Church.
Pyongyang, right?
Yeah, well, apparently Northwestern, all around Pyongyang, was amazing Presbyterian area. Some Methodist too, but mostly Presbyterian. And strangely enough, the Dulles brothers were Presbyterian too. So
Yeah,
I
I
don't
was
I don't
actually
want to pick on
raised in
Presbyterians, but
No, my I was raised in a Methodist church most of my life, so I guess I can't escape it either.
yeah, I just read this incredible book that just came out all about Kim Sung Il. I get names confused,
Just
but
a moment.
uh,
Mike, I'm going to wrap up the recording. So thank you everyone for being here. We'll continue some more discussion if anyone wants to stay on the call afterwards, but appreciate you. Check the links out in the in the description below. So thanks, folks.